Our speaker today is Lynn Batdorf. Since 1985, Lynn has served as the International Registration Authority for Buxus. He was curator of the National Boxwood Collection at the National Arboretum for 36 years. He earned a bachelor's in ornamental horticulture from the University of Maryland. Lynn is an honorary member, lifetime member of the American Boxwood Society, the European Boxwood and Topiary Society in England, and the French Association of Topiary and Boxwood. Lynn has also authored 6 books on boxwood and over 70 peer-reviewed articles about the same. So I'd like to welcome Lynn Batdorf. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Steve. It's always nice for me to talk to you guys. My email address is on, my website address is on here. I welcome questions from any Montgomery County Master Gardener if they have questions before, during, or after the presentation. The word boxwood is surprisingly complex for some people. It's actually both singular and plural. It is in fact correct grammar to say, I have 300 boxwood. There is in fact no such word in the English language as boxwoods. So many people say that it's on the internet, but there's no such word as boxwoods. You guys now know more than most people about boxwood. See how easy this is? So boxwood is grown all over the world. I've traveled and seen it in a lot of places. And so so here's a really cool picture from France, and so you can see the boxwood edging all of the parterres and the vegetable gardens and perennial gardens here. Imagine what it would look like without the boxwood. A private garden west of London, about 45 minutes west of London, very dramatic with the boxwood is being sheared with the other herbs and plants. Marcus Seck was actually there 6 weeks ago, and so very, very famous in Dordogne, France, one of the largest gardens for boxwood, very, very famous on a world level. It's all boxwood there. You can see some people in the top right corner to give you an idea of the scale of things. A little closer to home in St. Mary's City, this is a private residence just below St. Mary's College. And the English boxwood there actually surround the house, and those English boxwood are 8 to 9 feet tall, really, and they're about 180, 190 years old. And just some more boxwood. The bottom one in the center is kind of interesting because in England, they don't say boxwood, they say box. So a bit of dry English humor, they take the box in the shape of a box, in a container with a box. So there you are. And the bottom right one is in Mexico City and some other residential sites. Boxwood bonsai on the left, that's actually the only bonsai, the only boxwood bonsai at the National Arboretum where I worked for a long time. And so that's Buxus microphylla compacta, works really nice as a bonsai. Top right is a woman taking a bath, and some other pictures of boxwood topiary. A real cool one is the Omic Stoneheads in Mexico City. If you're familiar with the Omic Stoneheads, these are about 12 to 14 foot tall, and so really kind of a cool display there of boxwood topiary. The secret to boxwood is unknown to most people, and in the bottom left corner, some very, very important numbers. The boxwood has a specific gravity that averages between 53 and 72 pounds per square foot. In English, most times it sinks in water. There's less than 100 different woods. I think it's 70 some woods that will actually sink in water. Boxwood is one of those. So it's twice as hard, twice as dense as oak, which people think is a hardwood. It's not compared to boxwood. Really kind of cool in the very, very top right corner. is a boxwood stick, which was just recently found in Tuscany a few years ago, and it was dated to be 171,000 years old. And what they would do, they would just use that stick to make furrows to plant their seed. They realized a long time ago, because boxwood is so hard, the wood would last a long time. So it's a very, very durable instrument, which was used as a gardening implement to plant their seeds. Because the wood is so hard, it's been used for a lot of things. The big black and white picture is from the 1890s. It's in Port-a-Paté on the west coast of the Republic of Georgia. And those are boxwood semper trunks at the port getting ready to be shipped to London. The wood's been used for a lot of things. Here's just a few examples of some of the things the wood's used for. Why boxwood? Well, because it's so dense and hard, which I talked about. And so wood was being exposed to temperature and moisture fluctuations, so it would expand and contract based on these environmental influences. And so with boxwood, you always got a more precise measurements. That was always the go-to wood, because you knew under varying conditions, you were going to get the most precise measurement possible. It's also used for ornament. The one on the left is about the size of a grapefruit, which opens up. The one on the right is about 16 inches tall, and just a figurine of different things. And I was involved with several museum displays. And so here's a couple pieces here, some very, very famous ones. Linden with his Virgin Mary is 18 inches tall, one solid piece of boxwood. On the far right, the boxwood knife handle was a very, very famous piece. Again, one piece of boxwood, very intricately carved to hold the silver blade. In Versailles, very, very famous exhibit, the Gardens of Apollo. And so what's there is the boxwood is around the Baths of Apollo. And why is that there? Well, I'll tell you in a minute. It's also used at Winston Churchill's gravesite. And so it's the whole thing is boxwood was deemed to be pure and free of evil spirits back in the 14th, 15th centuries. Every plant had to serve a purpose, agrarian societies. And boxwood was deemed to be pure and free of evil spirits. And so you find it planted in sites like the Baths of Apollo at Versailles. So Winston Churchill, after he passed in 1965, eternal rest, he doesn't have to be bothered with evil spirits lurking around. And so boxwood has a lot of reported medicinal uses. In the Guinness Book of World's Record on the left, Birr Castle, which is in central southern Ireland, is in the Guinness Book of World's Record as the tallest boxwood hedge, operative word being hedge. And on the right, on the left side of the right picture, you can see the old 15th century Georgian church, and full screen is about the 18th century Georgian church. And what do both churches share? The boxwood hedge. Goes back to the evil spirit thing. And so before you go in the church, you cleanse yourself of evil spirits, you go in, you have your things. So boxwood is used in a lot of ways in landscape. Boxwood has a lot of other uses too. The alkaloids been studied very, very well. There's 37 alkaloids. Most important to us are buxanine and cyclobuxanine, concentrated in the young parts of the plant. Pound and a half will kill a full-grown cow. And so I found these pills on the internet from a Canadian pharmaceutical company a couple of years ago. I don't think it's available anymore. I had a chemist look at it, and about 27 of those would kill a person. So be careful what you buy on the internet. It makes no medicinal claims. It just says take 2 pills a day. So there you are. Boxwood, which most people don't realize, is on 4 continents. Boxwood as a group is mostly tropical. There's 115 species. Over 100 species are tropical. There's only 7 temperate species of boxwood. And from that, you have almost 300 cultivars of boxwood a day. And so here's just some leaves of different kinds of boxwood. All these on here are tropical except for the one. And so there's 2,319 boxwood. I know them all. And so just to give you an idea about boxwood, there's, I don't know, 4, 5, 6,000 islands in Greece, depending upon how small you want to count an island. One thing that's very important to remember, other than the weight, is that boxwood is a shade-loving plant. So here it is growing on one of the Greek islands. Do you see at the bottom of the screen? There's the boxwood there underneath the forest of pine trees. Boxwood is an understory shrub. Boxwood does not like to be planted in full sun. People plant it where it thinks it looks good without ever asking, is it in the best interest of the plant? And so usually it's not, because boxwood is an understory shrub, doesn't grow its best in full sun. Boxwood's an angiosperm, has to flower. People don't think about the flowering, so it does flower, does fruit. And so it's the center top, you can see the male flowers, and the top right, you see the female flowers, and then the fruit capsules in the bottom two pictures. Another thing about boxwood is the roots do not go down very far. This is an English boxwood, a Buxus semvaris fruticosa, that was at the U.S. National Arboretum. You can see it in the bottom left picture when it was removed. It was 7 feet tall and 7 feet wide. It was moved in the fall of the year, which is the best time to do it. I had it hand dug by professional contractors according to American Association specifications for a broadleaf evergreen shrub of that size. And that's why the dimensions were very, very specialized. And then they moved it outside of the hole. I then went to work for a week and calculated the root loss, and it lost 82% of the entire root mass being dug according to the best accepted professional specifications. And then I had the contractor come back a week later, put the boxwood back in the same exact hole. Because of the shock of losing over 80% of its roots, it died 3 years later under my care. I couldn't keep it alive. Box roots do not go down very far. They have a high soil air requirement. The box roots stay in the top 8 to 12 inches of soil. And actually, I found a boxwood root 9.5 feet from the center of that boxwood. The boxwood roots spread out very far. They don't go down very deep. A more dramatic example of that is this. And so I had a different boxwood where I just had the shop come in, chainsaw the boxwood down. It was a 12.5 foot tall boxwood. It was 9 feet tall. It was kind of pyramidal shape. Had them saw it down and just take a crane and just pull it straight up out of the ground. Pancake shaped root ball. The roots do not go down very far into the soil. They spread very far. They have a high soil air requirement. That becomes important with fertilization, edging, and things which I'll get into. Pests. There are boxwood pests. This is a common one that's been around for a while. In the top left corner is kind of what you see as the gull midge of the boxwood leaf miner. The boxwood leaf miner is not a leaf miner. It's actually a gull midge. And so you can see the damage on the leaves there. And on the right one, you can see it causes premature abscission. Boxwood keeps foliage for 3 years. And so you can see the second year foliage and third year foliage prematurely abscised because of the damage from the boxwood leaf miner. The bottom picture, the boxwood leaf miner oviposits on the underside of the leaf in the spring of the year. And in the top right picture, the gull midge do not mine or tunnel. They stay in the same place that's eating the mesophyll cells between the upper and lower epidermis. They do not mine and tunnel around. The 9, 10, 11 gull midge in there, certainly enough to cause premature abscission, which it certainly did. Another pest in the center screen, the top picture, the ball there is the leaves that have become cupped and curled from the feeding of the boxwood psyllid. Piercing, sucking mouth part sucks out all the mesophyll cells, and the vacuum pressure causes the leaf to become curled and cupped with the vacuum pressure creates. Also destroys the apical meristem, and so a lateral has to kind of come out from that to regrow. The bottom two pictures, that's frass, which is fecal material from the feeding of the boxwood psyllid. So sometimes you'll see that before you see the cupped leaves. What's cool is on On the top picture, you can see an adult at the very, very top of the screen there, same exact color as the boxwood leaf. And so that's by design. So the adult, which doesn't live very long, the adult is only out for about 4 or 5 days before they die. And if you can't be seen by your predators, you don't get eaten, which is why it's the same exact color as a boxwood leaf. Lots of scale, 1718 scale. I won't bore you with all of them, but some of the more common ones are, here's one soft scale, the wax scale at the top, and 2 hard scales, center and bottom of the screen. This always appears on the inside of the stem. This appears on 2nd, 3rd, 4th year wood. You won't see it unless you separate the foliage and look inside the plant. That's generally where you see it. Starting to become a big deal in the Mid-Atlantic region. Been common in the Gulf states for decades, and the Gulf states you actually get 2 generations a year. We're getting 1 generation of primarily these scale that you see here in the Mid-Atlantic region of the U.S. on a pretty regular basis, which wasn't always the case. A real common insect on boxwood is the boxwood mite. And on the left, a very dramatic example of very, very heavy feeding. What looks like someone took a straight pin, made scratch marks on the leaf. And so that's damage from the boxwood mite feeding, eating all the chlorophyll cells. Those leaves are completely dysfunctional and cannot contribute to the health of the plant. And so they're hard to see generally, the feeding damage, because they tend to focus on the 2nd and 3rd year leaves. They use the 1st year leaves as protection, and they eat on the 2nd and 3rd year leaves. So generally you don't see it on the outermost part of the plant, but it's on the inside. This can be very, very damaging. Mites like it hot, they like it dry. So boxwood that are in a very, very hot, dry, sunny site tend to have more mite damage than those otherwise. Predatory mites, Ambrosius species is very, very good. Here's one supplier. There's many suppliers worth their weight in gold. You don't need to spray miticides, but using predatory mites, it's brilliant. I've tested it on 120, I think, different types of boxwood, different cultivars. It's fabulous. It's great. Timing is important. You want to get it when the mites are in their finishing their 1st generation before they go in their 2nd. Mites in the Washington area tend to have 6, 7, 8 generations a year, depending upon temperatures. Also, if you look at the stem of the boxwood on the left, if you look at the stem, you'll see it's quadrangular in cross section. It's box shaped. The wood is box shaped, which is why boxwood is called boxwood. So this is really complicated stuff, but there you are. So if you look at the young wood, 1st, 2nd, 3rd year wood, the wood is box shaped, which is why it's called boxwood. So another pest, which is kind of new for us, it was found in southwest Germany in 2007 and Belgium the following spring. In less than 2 years, it went west all the way to the UK. It was found in Canada just a couple years later, and so it's now in the United States. I've been spending a lot of time on this, and I spent a couple weeks in Germany earlier this year, where the box tree moth is in its full glory. And so the adult has 2 different forms: the adult on the right, and the larvae, the feeding larvae, on the left. So on the top right picture, the larvae, when they're not eating, they'll make a web, and they'll take 2 leaves to make a sandwich, and so they use that as protection. So when they're bedding down for the night, and so they'll make a web around themselves, and always use boxwood foliage to protect themselves. So you see the larvae kind of peeking out from where the little house he made. On the left is a larger picture. This is from Germany. This was a Buxus sempervirens, and it defoliates the plant. So you can see the feeding damage from that. So you see the webbing there in the 2 pictures. Not to be confused with the bottom right picture, which is just a fall moth. This is not the boxwood tree moth. So don't confuse the 2 webbings. Different times of the year, the webbing looks quite different. The bottom right is not box tree moth. And so this is from Lockport, New York. I was up there last year. This is one of the counties where box tree moth has become established in the United States. from Canada. Our Canadian friends have been very, very good with disclosure and sharing information. We've got a lot of information from them. And so you can see this hedge, these two specimen plants, they went from totally green to totally defoliated in 7 to 8 days. Very rapid, very fast. The bottom right picture, you can see two larvae feeding on there on the stem. So after they eat all of the leaves, they strip the bark to eat the cambium tissue. So it's not enough they strip all the leaves, they actually will eat the cambium on the bark. And these are all my pictures. So officially it's in 7 states. It's soon to be in a state near you. I can't say more because it's not official yet, but it's officially in these 7 states. The New England states make sense. Why Tennessee and South Carolina? Well, trucking, plants being trucked from one place to another, a wonderful vector to spread the box tree moth. I'm involved. I'm a advisor on a international research committee looking at box tree moth, and so we're looking at pheromone lures versus mating disruptors. Mating disruptors are actually going to be the best way. Most people are familiar with pheromone lures. The mating disruptors are like that, except they're 3 milligrams. They're huge, they're really big, and so confuses the male. The male's flying around looking for the female who's hanging out on the boxwood, waiting for the male, can't find her because he smelled the female up in the air, and so generally fails to mate virtually 90% or even more percent of the time. The few times the mating is successful, BT variety K looks like a very promising strategy. We've tested it last year in Southern California in field test production, and it was very, very effective. And so it's being tested this year in an established population at Lockport, New York. Results aren't back yet, but it's very, very promising. And so most people are not even aware of the box tree moth. Ask any European, this keeps them up at night. The box tree moth does. I believe we'll have an answer before most people are even aware of it, but it's a big deal problem in Europe and potentially, at least for now, in New England. What we did find is not all boxwood are created equal. Winter gem on the left is a Japanese cultivar, and on the right, Green Mountain, which is a hybrid between a Korean and an English boxwood. And so this is again in Lockport, New York. And you see the Green Mountain, which you can't see from this picture, was completely untouched. I spent 10 minutes looking for any sign of box tree moth on that shrub, couldn't find it. The one immediately next to it, totally defoliated. So we're looking at the genetics and trying to isolate the sequence that the box tree moth doesn't like. Breeding is always a very, very long-term approach, but ultimately the best strategy. And so we're looking at that too. We're looking at several different things. In Sheridan Nurseries, I was there last year, and they've had the moth for a while. Hoop houses are commonly used for plants, and so generally used as a shading material. This is a 20% shading, which the box would appreciate, but it's not just the shading. The left picture, it's the size and shape of the hole keeps the flying adult from coming into the hoop house. So it actually protects the boxwood from the infiltration of the adult, so the adult can't fly into where the boxwood are, because the size and shape of the hole keeps them from entering that, and also provides essential shading to the boxwood. Very, very brilliant. My hat's off to Sheridan Nurseries. Diseases, there's lots of kind of diseases. The question is, what's going on and what causes it? Well, you always have to look a little bit deeper into it. Starting with the easy ones, this is imperfect fungi, macrophoma, which it likes a dark, moist, stagnant air environment, as any imperfect fungi would. So this first shows up on the inside of the plant, where the inside of the box is. Boxwood foliage is very dense, very hydrophobic, so the environment inside the boxwood is very different than outside. So after a rain or a mist or dew, the inside of the boxwood stays wet for many hours, usually many days after everything is dried off, and there's no air circulation. Macrophoma, imperfect fungi, love that. I'll come back to this. Voliatella is very, very similar, imperfect fungi, has a pink or orange cotton candy, visible with the naked eye sometimes. The macrophoma is always visible, has dark brown or black spots. The Voliatella is a little bit more capricious. You won't always see it unless the air temperature is upper 70s to mid 80s and the humidity is above 92%. Kind of exacting conditions to see the sporulating bodies of the Voliatella. You won't always see this, but it could be there. Control for both is the same, air circulation. And so by thinning the boxwood, it denies environment conducive to the growth of the macrophoma or Voliatella, two imperfect fungi. And so that's the best control, physical control. I do not recommend any fungicide for macrophoma or Voliatella. Why? Because the underlying conditions are still present, very dense, very hydrophobic leaves. Very difficult to get an even distribution of the spray of the fungal material, of the fungicides. And so you can't even get a good distribution of spray. And by the way, the problem's still going to be there. You shouldn't have to spray for this. Physical control by thinning the foliage is the best. And I'll explain this later. Another one, more common one that most people might know is boxwood blight, Colinectera. And so I want you to notice the top right picture, the staining on first year wood between the two petioles. And so you can see that's what it looks like generally. And another example is on the top left, what I call the frog's eye. That's kind of a secondary symptom. Both occur very, very quickly and will cause defoliation of the boxwood, just like the box tree moth, in 7 to 10 days. Very, very fast. What's interesting is we found that Colinectera does not kill the box roots. The boxwood roots still survive. What it does is causes defoliation. The plant refoliates, the disease comes back, it's present, and so causes defoliation again. The plant eventually dies from exhaustion. Does not kill the roots. It dies because of this no foliage. And I've been Woodrow Wilson Presidential Library several times, and you can go from the top left picture to the bottom right picture in a week and a half. This is not something you want to have happen to you or your boxwood. Why did this happen? Public garden. And so the boxwood spore, the Colinectera spore, is a two-celled linear spore, very tenacious, lives without a host for 6 to 7 years. It can wait for 6 to 7 years for it to affect the plant. How does it do that? Well, first, the states where it is most prominent. The redder colors are where it's more pronounced, and the lighter colors into the purple, not quite as pronounced, but it's pretty much got any state where boxwood's going to grow. Colinectera, the box blight, is it's everywhere where boxwood are in the United States. What's really cool, and I'll spend a minute here, please look at this website. Please write down this website. I'll keep the screen on for a minute. It's a gorgeous website done by Oregon State University and a couple other cooperators. It does degree days, cumulative degree days, and will tell you exactly how the temperatures and moistures are and what the chances are of you getting boxwood blight, what the risk of infection is. It's a brilliant website. It's free. There's no strings. You don't have to sign in. You don't have to do anything because it's by Oregon State University. It's brilliant. It's the best thing to help you decide if the current conditions are right for Colinectera box blight. It's a brilliant website. I please encourage you to look at that if you're concerned about box blight. Not all cultivars are created equal. It's about 140, 150 cultivars and a few species have been tested. Some are highly susceptible. At the very top of the screen, unfortunately, is English boxwood. Buxosaurus fruticosa is the poster child for susceptibility. And as you get towards the bottom, you can see some sempervirens and a few microphyllus that are not susceptible. So we're looking at genetics as one method of control, which is a long-term approach. What happens is the spore is on the ground. And so when the rain comes, the rain hits the spore, ricochets it up onto the plant. And so that's why infection occurs on the lower part of the boxwood first, and then spreads to the top part. And so in the bottom picture, center of the bottom picture, you can see the almost black staining on the stems there on the young wood. This is Buxus microphylla compacta. It's a very, very small leaf thing, but you can see the very, very dark staining there, very, very pronounced. And the top picture is the same plant, just a whiter picture of the same thing. It affects the lower part of the boxwood first. And so Dr. Chen Hong did a brilliant 2-year study about 3 years ago showing if you raise the skirts of the boxwood, you reduce the chance of getting coal nectar or box blight by an amazing 92 to 97%. Phenomenal control without any kind of fungicides. And so you raise the foliage, there's no foliage in the bottom 4 to 6 inches of the ground, because when the rain hits the spore, ricochets up on the boxwood, it doesn't touch the leaf, the stomata is on the other side of the leaf, and so there's no infection. Also, mulching the leaf, causes the raindrop to disperse, so it doesn't ricochet the spore so much. Brilliant physical control, easy control, anyone can do it. Spraying boxwood should not be necessary. Where's the other 4, 5, 6% of boxwood blight infection coming from? It's coming from sprayer hose. It's coming from lawnmower services that go from one house to another house. It's coming from spraying hoses. It's coming from those kind of inside outside things. Much like I showed you Presidential Woodrow Wilson Library. That was because it's a public place. The spores, we believe, were on someone's shoes and they came in there. That's how it became infected. So it's those kind of catalysts which are the remaining few percent of the infection of box blight. So it's very, very easy control. Meadow nematodes, there's spiral, root knot, lesion nematodes. There's about 12 or 15 different species of nematodes. What they do is they basically cause, root death. They cut the roots, and so the roots try to regrow. These boxwood were dying a slow, lingering death. What you see on nematode damage is the entire plant slowly becomes lethargic and smaller leaves, light colored, uniformly all over the entire plant. You want to suspect nematodes if that's the case. Black twig borer, the top left picture, about the size of a coat hanger, affecting older boxwood or stressed boxwood. You're going to see these holes waist high or lower, generally about knee high, and they cause a blight, which causes the entire branch to die on usually older boxwood, and it will kill one entire branch, nothing more. And that's always the black twig borer. Shearing. People love to shear their boxwood. And so it looks like the one on the left, I guess. And so here I opened up so you can kind of see the leaves are fractionalized, cut in halves, quarters, and thirds. And inside the boxwood is this very, very dense branching and no foliage. Well, if you keep doing that and keep doing that for a while, eventually the head starts looking like the center picture, where the plant is starved, the leaves are starved for light, and so the center portion begins to die out very slowly. I call it a wishbone kind of thing. And so the outsides are still alive because it has the light, the inside does not, so it starts to thin and die out. And the far right, if you keep shearing, then the whole sections start to die out. And this is because of shearing. And close up different boxwood shearing, it fractionalizes leaves, cuts them in halves, quarters, and thirds, destroys the apical meristem because it's the leaves and only the leaves to protect the apical meristems and the stems from sun, scald, and frost injury. So those damaged abiotic conditions come in as a secondary infestation, really damaging the boxwood. So what's a person to do? Sure, go ahead and shear your boxwood, have no problem with that, but you must thin your boxwood if you're going to do that. And so on the bottom left picture, don't break the branches, use hand pruners to cut the branches. And so what you want to do is you want to keep thinning until it looks like the picture on the right. So you start to see inside the plant. So you start to see all 3 years foliage. Remember I said boxwood has 3 years of foliage. You don't want it really tight and dense on the left, which looks really good, might get you on the cover of Home and Gardens, but you want the picture on the right so you don't have twig death, from Macrophoma volutella and sun scald, frost injury, and so on, because the shearing exacerbates all this. Thin your boxwood if you're going to shear them. Landscaper disease, this was a backpack blower inside the boxwood, blowing leaves. The exhaust was going out, and the guys were staying there for a while, and the heat from the exhaust of the backpack blowers, about 10 days later, kill these branches. Abiotic, not a disease, abiotic conditions. What's cool about it is on the left, you can see it occurs regularly every 6 inches at the same exact height, and so that kind of gives you a clue there. So abiotic conditions can be a lot of different things. Two very disconcerting things. The top right picture, people blame the boxwood for things they shouldn't. People look at this, and so this was taken in the fall. This was October. I don't remember, late September. It was late October. And so the boxwood foliage is starting to die. As well as just the bad plant. Well, no. What happened is because they sheared the boxwood wrong time of the year, encouraged a second flush of growth. All temperate plants reacquire winter hardiness every year. So it has to go through 3 distinct phases to do that. So if you shear boxwood in late summer, the foliage doesn't have time to go through those 3 phases to reacquire winter hardiness before frost comes along in the fall of the year. So that foliage that was stimulated by shearing is killed by a frost. They're blaming the plant. It was not the plant's fault. They sheared it the wrong time of the year. Bottom left picture, early spring. People would say, well, oh, we had an early frost, and isn't that a shame? Look what it did to my boxwood. Not true. These people were crazy. They were over-fertilizing the boxwood. So when you fertilize boxwood, it's a go message. And so they fertilized at the wrong time of the year. Boxwood should be fertilized only in the fall of the year, only if it needs it. You know that from soil test results. You should not fertilize boxwood on a regular basis. This box was over-fertilized. The foliage, leaf bud break was too early. The foliage grew, was killed by a frost. People blamed the early spring frost. No, it was because they over-fertilized the boxwood, which had nothing to do with the temperatures. It was cultural, abiotic. Boxwood in containers have problems too. Boxwood roots stay very close to soil surface. They don't like to go down deep, so they don't have a lot of protection from temperature or moisture fluctuations. So when boxwood's in a container, you can see the snow in the background on the left. And so this was a January shot. And so you get the discolored foliage because the roots are having a hard time. It's not the top of the plant you need to think about. It's the roots you ought to think about. In the absence of the chlorophyll cells, expose the carotenoids and flavonoids, giving it the yellow, orange, and red pigmentations. More abiotic things, as I mentioned, boxwood leaves are hydrophobic, and so dew and mist particularly, the moisture tends to collect on the end of the leaves. And so if the sun comes out when these are partially wet, it acts like a microscope, a magnifying glass, I mean to say, and so that can actually burn the cuticle and burn all the way through the foliage. And that's simply because the boxwood was exposed to full sun that had wet foliage. Not an insect, not a disease, just another abiotic condition where the box was planted in the wrong site because it had too much sun. Even this looks disconcerting here. And see, this is classic example of magnesium deficiency and phosphorus deficiency right here, textbook example. But no, the soil was not deficient in those because I did a soil test. The soil pH in this soils was 5.9 to 6.2. And so the pH was too low for boxwood. Boxwood has 2 rules. One I talked about. So it likes shade. It's an understory shrub. The second thing is the soil pH must be between 6.8 and 7.5. Boxwood grows in calcareous, limestone, chalk formation soils. 75% of the boxwood wood is calcium. It loves high pHs. It loves being neutral. So in this environment where it had low pH, it couldn't assimilate all the nutrients. So it looks like phosphorus and manganese deficiency. Well, I need to go to the garden center, buy more fertilizer because it looks deficient. No, the pH is wrong. It's so easy for me to convince anyone to spend $100 on fertilizer. It's very hard for me to convince anyone to spend $10 on a soil test to determine if you need fertilizer or if you need lime, and if you do, what type and at what rate and what time of the year. Very critical conditions. Boxwood does everything slowly. I talked about the hardness of the wood. Because it's such a hard wooded plant, which I mentioned in the beginning of the spring, it reacts to things very slowly. So what you do or fail to do to the plant now may not manifest itself for years, sometimes decades later. It does not respond quickly like your zinnias and marigolds in your potted plants. Totally different physiology. Herbicide damage usually occurs near the bottom of the plant, not necessarily. The bottom right one may be the most dramatic. And so that was people using a herbicide, a non-specific herbicide to spray the weeds in the bed there. The wind blew. I actually saw people do it. They didn't spray the boxwood, but the wind blew the drift into the boxwood, and that died, 10, 14, 20 days later. And other examples of what herbicide damage can look like. Keeping the bottom right picture in your mind for a second, look at that and compare it to this. And so this also occurs at the bottom of the plant. So it looks like herbicide damage, but in fact was male dogs just doing their thing to boxwood. So that could be another cause for foliage turning, discoloring and dying at the bottom of the plant near the ground. I guess both these pictures look good. They're both in England, very, very tidy plants, but they're actually both very, very bad. The one on the left was taken, it's an old picture, more than 25 years ago. I was back there 3 years ago, and that hedge has since been replaced. Why has this hedge on the left been replaced? Because the roots have nowhere to grow. The roots can't grow to the right because the bricks are there. They can't grow to the left because perennials are there. They can't grow up or down because there's other boxwood there. The roots have too much competition or nowhere to grow. And kick some sand in their face, they're also being heavily sheared. Boxwood is a very tenacious plant, again, a very hard-wooded plant, can withstand a lot of environmental, cultural, and landscape conditions, but the chronic stress of this, eventually the head succumbed to this and had to be replaced when I was there 3 years ago. I have not been to the back to this other place on the right. Both of these are in England. But what's bad about this picture with this linear straight hedge, linear straight edging, is they were cutting so many boxwood roots. They were cutting, breaking, fractionalizing, wounding boxwood roots. Boxwood roots stay close to soil surface. They were pruning and cutting a lot of boxwoods. If you want to have a straight edge, that's fine. The distance is appropriate because it's away from the boxwood, unlike the one on the left. But the one on the right, they're using a shovel and constantly re-edging all the time. If you want that edge, fine, but use brick or stone or some edging material where you're not constantly not cutting or wounding the boxwood roots because they're right at the soil surface where you are with a shovel. Weather, snow and ice. I haven't always talked about the one in the top left, which is ice. This is from a dear friend of mine in Ukraine. I never mentioned this before. I've known her for a long time, for about 2 decades, and she sent me this picture quite a few years ago. And so she's still alive, thank God. And so this is ice damage on bucks and timber irons, and snow damage, and 2 other examples. When you have snow or ice on the boxwood, and yes, the picture on the right is disconcerting. We have a tall, upright, handsome pyramidal boxwood that's just about to touch the ground. It looks fatalistic. Do nothing. Please do nothing. The wood, again, it's very, very hard, very, very dense. The cold temperatures make it even more brittle. So we're all educated people, and you'd want to go out there and use a broom and sweep up, because we know sweeping up is the best way. We wouldn't knock it down. But that, because the boxwood is so hard and dense, the cold makes it even more brittle. What happens is, I've seen a lot of times when people remove the snow, is I've had branches die in the middle of summer from winter injury because the fractionalizing of all the vessel elements, the cadmium, when they were trying to remove the snow from the boxwood. Don't remove the snow or ice. And people will do all kinds of things too. And so all these are really, I wouldn't do any of these. Please don't do any of these. The bottom one is at the FDR Memorial Memorial Library in New York. I will make names, and they cover their boxwood in burlap, which is incredible. And so it's a vector for all kinds of boxwood diseases. Boxwood is a very cold hardy plant. You don't need to cover it. Please do not do that in any of these sites. On the left, the boxwood planted too much sun, and so that caused the cadmium to disrupt. The picture on the right, bark rubbing, not peculiar to boxwood, but does occur a lot of plants. And so sometimes interior branching is something you to look to. And so what that can do on the one on the right is cause the foliage on those branches at the terminal ends to be smaller in size, maybe a little bit discolored. And so the answer may not be at the terminal ends of the branches. It could be the branches are rubbing. So it could be something as simple as that. I never believed it till I saw it, but there are birds, small birds, chickadees, titmice, and a couple other small birds. They can actually hear the gall midge, the boxwood leaf miner, feeding. I didn't believe it till I saw it, but the picture on the bottom, picture on the left, is the small birds ripped apart the bottom of the leaf to eat the boxwood leaf miner, the gall midge, inside. It's true, and so it can happen. It's nice because they eliminate the boxwood gall midge, but they also destroy the leaf, of course. On the right, sap suckers, very, very smart birds. And so what they do is they wound the bark, the trunks of boxwood like this. They fly away. The sap collects and starts gathering, and this damage occurs from the sap suckers. That attracts all kinds of insects. The sap suckers come back, I don't know, 4, 5, 7, 10 days later, and feast on all the insects attracted by the sap flowing from the boxwood. So a very clever bird, but usually fatalistic, can be fatalistic to a very, very large boxwood, sap suckers. Lichen and mosses, they're saprophytic. They don't feed off what's dead. They just feed off what's already dead, being saprophytic. Just something to look for. This is going to occur on the inside of the plant generally. As I mentioned, there's over 1,000 boxwood. I see I have lots of time to talk about all of them, so here we go. This is Buxus bulerica, the largest leaf boxwood. If you take your index finger and touch it to the end of your thumb, that's the size of the leaf. It's a really large leaf boxwood. The picture on the right is in Tbilisi, Georgia, and you can see people there. Somewhat of it's a tropical but cold hardy boxwood. Really, really cool. Another species, Buxus harlandii, the longest leaf boxwood of any. Really, really kind of cool plant. Very, very neat. And these are all unpruned specimens. I'm just showing you a dozen or so, just the variety, the rich variety of some of the possibilities of boxwood. Buxus harlandii has one cultivar, Richard, the bottom right picture, a very, very strong retuse apex right there, really unique in boxwood, really cool. Microphylla means little leaf. One of the more popular ones is green pillow. So you can kind of see a plant in a close-up right there. The green pillow matures at about 18, 24 inches tall and about 24 inches wide. No shearing required to get it to look like that. It does it all by itself. Another microphylla, curly locks, kind of a really cool, casual, informal boxwood. Kind of a J, K, L shape, pick your consonant, a very carefree plant, not formal at all. And just a very large plant. They get about 8, 10 feet tall, and they can be 12 to 14, 16 feet across. Really like this plant. A Japanese boxwood, Microphylla japonica, relatively new, was introduced about 2005, 2010. Really kind of cool because it kind of just, the branches kind of weep down, which is kind of really neat. Japanese boxwood is a very rapid grower. You can get 6 to 8, 10 inches a year if you push it with fertilizer. So it grows very quickly, and very quickly it looks like a mature hedge. Really cool boxwood. Another Japanese boxwood, very cold hardy boxwood, as the name might suggest, winter gem. And so a cold hardy Japanese boxwood. Again, very, very rapid grower, 6 to 8 inches a year. Growth is not unusual. Winter gem matures about shoulder high and gets about 10, 12 feet across. This takes shearing pretty well, actually. Buxus sempervirens, Carl Linnaeus in 1753 wrote the species Plantarium. You can see the species he used in his from Clifford's Herbarium to describe Buxus sempervirens. That's the picture in the top right corner, which I've seen. And here's one Buxus sempervirens growing at College of William and Mary. As you can see how big one sempervirens can get. There's lots of different cultivars inside the sempervirens. Here's a very, very popular variegated one, Elegantissima, which is kind of cool. Lots of variegated boxwood. So here's just a few more. These are really cool. These are upright boxwood. I do not recommend the one on the left, Graham Blandy, which is a popular boxwood. These boxwood have not been pruned, sheared, wired, taped. Nothing's been done to these. These are doing it all by itself. D. Runk on the right is a really cool fastigiate boxwood. No shearing, no pruning, nothing. It's doing it all by itself. You need to get a single stem plant. The nursery trade, unfortunately, grows these as multi-stem plants, which is not in the nature of the plant. Get a single stem plant. It'll do that all by itself without you touching it. That one's about 25 years old on the right. There is such a thing as a ground cover boxwood. Here it is doing it as well as it does it, the National Arboretum. And so never gets more than about 18, 24 inches tall. And it's about 14, 15 inches across from tip to tip. So really kind of very unique boxwood. Requires some space, but a very, very, really special specimen boxwood. Rosemarifolia looks like a rosemary plant because the leaves are about the same size and shape as the herb rosemary. But the picture on the right, the leaves are recurving. As you can see how it kind of curves, which is kind of cool. So the whole plant doesn't look that good, but the individual leaves are really spectacular. So kind of a collector's plant, I think. Rosemarifolia is really, really nice. Grows particularly well in the Northwest United States, Oregon and Washington State. English boxwood, you have to talk about English boxwood because if we say the word boxwood, people most commonly think about English boxwood, and here's some here. Again, very, very susceptible to colonectra box blight. But again, remember, raise the skirts 4 to 6 inches, and you will likely not get colonectra. Vadar Valley, collected in Vadar River Valley in what was Yugoslavia in the 1930s, the most cold hardy boxwood in the sempervirens species. Glaucous foliage, I have the mature plants at the National Arboretum from the 1935 collection expedition, and they're 9 feet tall and about 15, 18 feet across. Really good plant. No insect disease problems to speak of, and so it's a really great plant. There is such a thing as a boxwood with exfoliating bark. The team I was with, we found this in Republic of Georgia near the Iranian border. And so I'd read about it for a long time in botanical literature, but had never seen a specimen. There is such a thing. I think it's the most amazing thing in the world. Boxwood with exfoliating bark, looking like a Betula papifolia, something like that. Really special. Korean boxwood, Seneca variansularis from the Korean Peninsula, is the most cold hardy of all boxwood. Tend to have smaller leaves, usually tends to have longer internodes, not always. There are some new cultivars come out with shorter internodes, so it doesn't have that rangy or wild look as much, but very, very cold hardy, very cold tolerant, great boxwood. People will say zone 4. Zone 4 is not correct. Zone 5, certainly 5B, it'll grow just fine. There's a lot of hype with boxwood recently, and people advertising boxwood growing in zone 4 and 5 don't believe it. They do it to promote sales. Quite often, it only in microenvironments it will survive, but in a general hardiness zone, it will not survive in zone 4 or 5 very much. But the Korean boxwoods will do zone 5. Remember, we're talking a tropical plant, because boxwood as a family, as a genus, is mostly tropical. So cold hardiness is a very, very important trait, and the Koreans do it best of any of the boxwood. A hybrid boxwood, John Baldwin. This is actually 2 plants together on the left. This is at Dawes Arboretum in Ohio. This is another hybrid boxwood released a couple years ago, and being touted as a colonectra, that is to say, a boxwood blight resistant plant. It is. That's the good news. So it's 2 steps forward. However, the bad news is it's highly susceptible to box mites. So 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The nursery trade, anywhere, no one will talk about the susceptibility to mites. And so I think that mite damage is pretty severe, but it is an advance, and I do welcome it. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so doing some breeding work, there's a domestic breeder, and there's actually a breeder in Belgium doing some brilliant work on breeding colonectra resistant boxwood. And so we're getting very far in that. Boxwood's a big deal crop. It's one of the best-selling crops in the United States, which is why there's so much money being invested into looking at colonectra resistance initiatives and also box tree moth initiatives. A lot of good research projects, and I'm quite involved with both of them. So it's a big deal crop in the United States. Boxwood's a very beautiful plant. You can use it a lot of different ways, see it a lot of different ways, limited only to your imagination. It's just a great plant all the way around. Yes, it has problems, kind of a sucker punch with the blight and colonectra and the box tree moth, but this too shall pass. I really believe it will. It's just understanding the plant and giving it time. And because there's all kinds of people out there doing all kinds of work on boxwood, and so boxwood's going to be around for a long time, and so all kinds of people love boxwood. Here's two of my favorite friends right here, and boxwood is on the money. You tell me any other plant that has boxwood prominently featured on U.S. currency. It's on the back of the 5 at the Lincoln Memorial. It's on the back of the 20 at the White House. I've worked at both places, consultations, on-site consultations, both places many times. Boxwood's on the money. So if people still carry currency, they likely have a portrait of boxwood in their purse or wallet. Isn't that cool? Thank you very much. I think I might have a minute for your questions.
All right, thanks, Lynn. Let me see, is it
I'm gonna,
thank
yeah.
you, Sue.
Rotting celery.
Okay, the first question was, what is the best treatment for boxwood mites?
Celery.
The best treatment for boxwood blight is pruning up the foliage. There's no foliage the bottom 4 or 6 inches of the ground, and mulching that soil.
Okay, I think the question was about mites.
Oh, mites, sorry. Predatory mites. I mentioned predatory mites. The ambrosia species, if you Google predatory mites, I showed you one manufacturer. There's a lot of manufacturers of predatory mites. You want the ambrosia species. Most of the growers are in California, and they are absolutely fantastic. Follow the instructions carefully. Make sure you understand what you're buying before you get them, because it's like fish out of the water. So when they come, you must put them out immediately into your boxwood. You put out the predatory mites too early, they starve because there's not enough boxwood mites around. You put them out too late in the season, there's so many mites around, the predatory mites can't make a dent into the boxwood. It's very, very important you put the predatory mites out after the first generation, before the second generation. In the greater Washington area, that means early June, early to mid-June.
Thank you. You paint a very bleak picture of so many boxwood pests and disease. They sound impossible to cultivate. Can you please narrow down which might be more prevalent in our Montgomery County area that we can reasonably watch for and address?
I open with and close with nice pictures showing how good boxwood is. Then I get in the nitty-gritty of the insects, diseases, and the cultural conditions. Everything I showed you occurs in the Mid-Atlantic region.
Okay. Are the pruning and fertilization recommendations also good for inkberry holly, which is often used as a boxwood substitute?
Ilex is an acid-loving plant, and so the pH requirements will be different. The fertilization, I believe, is about the same. I knew Gene Eisenbice, who was the holly registrar. I'm the boxwood registrar, and we would have conversations in the office. And so I understand a little bit about the pH requirements and the fertilization requirements, but they're both broadleaf evergreen shrubs, but that's where the differences end. No, any recommendation for boxwood, very few recommendations for boxwood would also apply to hollies.
Thank you. Are there boxwood at Ladue Topiary Garden in Hartford County, Maryland?
I've been there 4 or 5 times in about as many decades. My last time, it's been almost 10 years. There were boxwood there. I believe there still are, but I just honestly don't know.
Thank you. Could you please briefly show the moisture chart again?
The moisture chart?
Yeah, I'm not sure what they mean. And then the last question was, what are the fertilization requirements for boxwood?
Okay, trying to find the moisture. Okay, can you see the moisture?
Yes,
Okay, so is that what the person was wanting?
not sure.
The only other thing that comes to mind is, which I didn't talk about, is rainfall, irrigation, those kind of things, because boxwood, like most other plants, inch a year, which is kind of inch a week, excuse me, which is kind of generic, which doesn't say anything. Boxwood leaves have a very, very thick, waxy cuticle, so it doesn't need a lot of supplemental watering outside of establishment in the first 3 years. It takes boxwood 3 years to become established in a new site. Generally, it doesn't need supplemental watering, that's to say drip or overhead or pop-up irrigation, except during the hottest, driest part of the summer. And it doesn't need a lot of water. Again, boxwood roots have a high soil air requirement, and so it likes a lot of soil air, which is why the roots grow close to soil surface. You shouldn't have to water established boxwood at all. Boxwood leaves will not wilt because they're so large. The other question was about the fertilization of boxwood. Yeah, I kind of blew over that because time's short. But the most critical thing is doing a regular soil test. You want to make sure the pH is between 6.8 and 7.5. As far as the macro and micronutrients, anything in the good range is going to be important. Manganese and calcium tend to be on the higher side sometimes, and even into excessive levels. Talking about those two micros. And that's, I'm not concerned about those because the calcium, again, boxwood has a high calcium content. The other is mobile, and so it's not a big deal with the plant. So you almost can't have too high in nutrients. You can, but you can get at toxic levels because of the salts, which are carriers. But in the Mid-Atlantic region, if you want to get as narrow as Montgomery County, which part of it has the Beltsville clay profile going through part of Montgomery County, it tends to be relatively clay soil, which means it tends to be very nutrient rich, but also tends to be it tends to be very not very porous. And so there's a lot of exceptions to that. This is in very, very general terms. But I was at the National Arboretum for 36 years. I did soil tests every 2 years. In those 36 years, if memory serves, I limed 11 times and I fertilized 7 times in those 36 years. And I did the rate and type of fertilizer based on soil recommendations. Lime can be applied any time of the year if it needs it. Doesn't matter the season. Fertilization, if it needs it, very important point, only in the fall of the year, October being the best singular month, because 80% of the annual root growth of boxwood occurs in December, January, February, March. Those 4 months of the year, 80% of the roots grow. So if you apply fertilizer in the fall of the year, you stimulate the root growth. So in the spring, you stimulate more foliage growth based on what the roots grew. You don't want to fertilize in the spring of the year, never, ever. You get more leaves, they're bigger, they're darker green. You think, well, that's really wonderful. Look how the plant responded. Yes, you've created a stressed plant though, because you don't have the appropriate amount of foliage growth to support all that. You don't have the appropriate amount of root growth to support all that foliage growth. You want to have the root growth first to support the appropriate amount of foliage growth.
I've had a couple of messages trying to clarify what they wanted to see. One says the map showing moisture throughout an area. Then the other one says the slide with the university website that you so highly recommended.
Yeah, the university website's a good one. And that's here. So uspest.org/WEA, done by Oregon State University. It's brilliant. I really recommend it. They came out with it about a year or so ago. I know a couple of people on that team. There's no registering. There's no fee. It's a university, and so it's really great. And so it does. And I just picked the Baltimore, Washington area because that's kind of where we are. But you can do anywhere in the U.S. It's really neat. Again, uspest.org/WEA. It's brilliant. It's very large. So it takes there's not a big learning curve, but there's a few nuances to it to really utilize it to its best. And you can zoom in, zoom out, and this is this is great. I'm sorry, what was the other thing also someone wanted?
I think it's the previous chart, the one right before this. I'm not sure though. And the last thing was, they asked if you could please bring up the first page with your website again.
Yeah, I will take questions from any master gardener. So please email me. There's my website there. If you just say that you're from, Steve's master gardener class, I will answer your questions specifically. If I'm in town, I'll answer it right away. I travel a lot.
Okay, that's all the questions. Back to you, Steve. And thank you, Lynn.
Yep. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks very much for a very informative presentation on this. I know it's been a while since you had present to us, and there's a lot been happening, with the diseases and pests coming around our area. I also want to thank our tech team today, Dick and Sue, for their assistance, and also to remind everyone that our next meeting will be face-to-face at the Montgomery County Fairgrounds. Eric Winger, one of our own, is going to be presenting to us growing turf or lawn in Montgomery County. It'll be at the Montgomery County Fairgrounds, Heritage Hall, the regular time. It won't be taped. I'm trying to encourage. There's been a lot of folks who want to have a face-to-face meeting, and I'm trying to optimize that by just having, not being taped. And I hope you can really make it. And I'm pretty sure we'll have a pretty good turnout from the new class at that meeting. I thought a few of them might have came in today because some of them probably read the newsletter, but we actually formally really kind of ended the training recently, and we're still kind of in the process of getting the new class on board. We're going to be doing some training next week on the volunteer management system. So again, I want to thank everyone, particularly Lynn, for their excellent presentation, and hope to see some of you in the future face-to-face, either at the Extension office or over the Montgomery County Fairgrounds. Again, thank everyone.